So, a little introduction to this then. And I'm thinking about this particularly because we're all thinking about George Floyd today and of people like him. And my family has a long relationship with Ultimate Weapons. My father worked at the HBM project. He was one of the people who brought the weekly reports from New Mexico to Washington. And he and a couple of other people would fly the reports in SMED planes literally under the radar from New Mexico to Washington. And they used to like to get rid of the FBI man on the way. Later on, we went to Japan and we had a Japanese maid, Yaiko Ozawa. And my sister and I heard about her family, her brothers and sisters and her aunts and uncles. And then Shichigo-san, we see her family, which was her mother, because the Ozawa family had lived in Nagasaki. I think of that quote from W.H.R., "Those to whom evil is done do evil in return." I don't think it's that simple. Those to whom violence has been done
become violent.
Get changed. There's a power unleashed by violence in places and in persons, like the violence, the change that happens in Japanese mythology to a place where death has happened, where murder has been done. You can call it ghosts or curses, but what that power does may be in nobody's power to control. So, George Floyd, the Ozawa family of Nagasaki. This was one of my first stories. I wrote it in the early 1990s. So, for instance, Loring Air Force Base is still open, and it appeared in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, which is back to, but never mind. And the story is called Touched by the Ball. Last week I buried my only child, and I may have asked his murderer to his funeral. Eddie was burned to death on a highway outside Loring and on an icy road up north in Maine, but in Arlington it was spring. The gun salute crashing over my boy's grave shook cherry blossoms from the trees. Across the black soil, through the fog, they drifted like a message from Akiko. And I thought of Akiko and graves. In the middle of the service, I saw her walking across the grass toward me. She was old and unexpectedly elegant, a Japanese matron in a black suit and pearls. In my good black bereaved leather purse, I put my hand on Dad's old service pistol. I'm crazy, I thought. Johnny Latimer was crazy. Akiko couldn't have done what he said she did. But I stood by Eddie's grave, my hand in my purse, where the gun was, and I waited for her. 40 years ago, just after the Second World War, my family was stationed in Japan. The year I was 6, my family took in a Japanese girl named Akiko, and I made up a horror story about her. I was the only child. We lived in a house in what had been somebody's rice field, across from a graveyard. Dad spent most of his time in the city, but American families with young kids lived out in the country, miles from Hiroshima. The Air Force Base where we went to school smelled like chalk and linoleum and soap. The American car that drove us smelled like gas and upholstery cleaner. Good Eisenhower-era American smells. But in the country, Japan was foreign, frantic. Every morning I woke up to this man, ringing his bicycle bell, calling soba, soba, with the 10 bags of fresh tofu and butter strapped to his handlebars. I loved the smell of tofu. It smelled like edible daffodils. In the spring, when the cherry blossoms fell, the clay roads gave off an earthy smell like bare feet, and the cemetery by our house smelled cool and dark, crushed grass and granite, memorial pillars, old willows. But the new cemetery down the road was crowded and noisy like a market, full of laundry soap and rice, shoyu and cooking oil because people lived there. Thousands of people had survived Hiroshima. In old family tombs, shaped like stone houses, 4 feet long and 3 feet high, smaller than under a table, whole families were living. I was part of a gang, I suppose you'd call it, of mostly Japanese kids who hung around the cemeteries. We started by eating the rice and the little blood tangerines, the mikans that were left as offerings on the graves. But we were kids and we were hungry, and pretty soon we started stealing from the families. We'd sweep down an old lady cooking a tiny piece of fish over a hibachi and snatch it away from her, or overturn a rice pat and run away laughing with handfuls of stiff glutinous rice. It was hot enough to burn our palms and fingers, and my little Japanese friends licked their burnt palms until nothing rice grain was left. My crime spree couldn't have lasted long. I was caught with some caramels I had lifted from a stand in the market, and Mother decided I needed to be watched because she didn't want me to get sick. Rural Japan then was still a third world country. The honey buckets went right from the privies to the vegetable fields. The sparrows came down and fed on the fields, and in the market, the roast sparrows and the unwashed vegetables and the fish from Hiroshima Bay all ended up on the same wooden stands together. At the American school, we American kids drank our cartons of milk and ate our peanut butter sandwiches and wonder bread imported from the States, while our mothers listened to lectures about hookworm. We were never supposed to eat anything unless it came from the PX. So Mother hired a Japanese girl to watch me, one of the girls who lived in the new cemetery. Akiko wore a tiny nickel cross on a chain around her neck, a gift from the Catholic sisters who would taught her English. She spoke halting English, French accented. She wore Western clothes, modest high-neck blouses, sweaters, and skirts, but no fingernail polish on her clean, square nails and almost no lipstick. This disappointed me because I was 6 years old and fascinated by makeup. Akiko is a treasure, Mother said to her bridge friends. Such a pretty girl, but not one of that kind. In my family photos, Akiko looks 16 and still a schoolgirl. I remember her as very large, standing protectively over me at the corner of some busy street, holding my hand before we crossed together. She took me everywhere. In a crowd at a festival, she held me up to see a gilded shrine bouncing by on the shoulders of chanting Shinto worshippers. In a street market, she bought me painted paper kites, wooden shuttlecocks with the faces of demons, tin trains that ticked around sharp tin tracks. She made me endless paper dolls, and we drew and colored and cut out clothes for them together, girls and boys, whole paper families. At the playground by our American school, she stood in a crowd with all the other Japanese nursemaids, her arms tucked into the wide floppy sleeves of the cloth coat Mother had given her, waiting for hour after hour while her American child played. She was eager to spoil me, and I loved her for it. But my Japanese friends were afraid of her. My best friend from the cemetery, Tamiko, was one of a few lucky Japanese children who attended the American school. She didn't know any more English than I knew Japanese. She sat in class hour after hour with her fingers folded, but it seemed important to her parents that she was there, the same way it was important to my parents that Akiko wore her Western clothes and her Christian cross. After school, Tommy and I would go outside and play, jacks or swings, things we could do without knowing each other's language. But whenever Akiko came over toward us, Tammy retreated to the swing or the sandbox until she left. Akiko Hibakusha. Tammy looked at my Akiko like the other characters in Dracula looked at Bela Lugosi. What's Hibakusha? I asked my mother that evening. I liked the effect of bad words, and I hoped it was them. Don't you ever use that word, Annie dear. It's hurtful to Akiko. What does it mean? It means, my mother hesitated. It means someone who lived in the city. Tommy lived in the city. Tommy's family lived on the perimeter. My mother's voice took on a low, strained tone she used for grown-up words like cancer. Akiko-san's house was in the city center. She hesitated, and a moment later added, it means touched by the bomb. Akiko's first victim was Johnny Latimer. Johnny was one of the psychologists who descended on Hiroshima after the war, a staid, bland, straight arrow Baptist from Iowa, who'd come to help fix the greatest trauma the world had ever known. His job was studying trauma in survivors. And he did everything right, learned Japanese, really cared about his patients. And if he was just a little bit excited that Hiroshima had come along when Johnny Latimer was ready to write papers, he wasn't obvious about it. Johnny started hanging around Akiko. Every day he'd wander to the playground and talk to her while she waited for me. He was easily a foot taller than she was, so he'd have to bend down in a funny way and we children would laugh at him. Akiko would smile up at him, her hands tucked in the sleeves of my mother's coat. And even I, 6 years old, could see how pretty she was then. She looked like a flower. She was beautiful. One night, Akiko told me secretly that Johnny had applied to marry her under the War Brides Act. I started crying because Akiko was going to go away. And she started crying too, and we had to console ourselves by thinking that we would be together again in the United States, which we thought of as small, about the size of Shikoku, or maybe even city-sized, since almost everyone at the base seemed to have known each other in the States. Akiko made my favorite paper doll, a Shinto wedding costume, out of real cloth, red and gold brocade pasted onto a paper backing, and the two of us spent hours looking at Japanese bride magazines. But the other Japanese nursemaids drew away from her when they heard she was going to be married. Now she waited for me all alone, away from them. I asked my mother about it. Because she's touched by the man. The other girls don't think she should marry or have any family. But don't talk about it, Annie dear. One spring day, not long after, Johnny took Akiko and me to the beach. On our way, we passed the city. From far away, behind the cherry blossom trees, we saw the acres of blackened rubble and the skeleton dome of the Industry Promotion Hall. Johnny drove past on the new highway, teaching me to sing Zippity-Doo-Dah, not mentioning the city outside our windows. Something not for me, like I shouldn't eat morning-on caramels. Something not even to notice. Tell me about when you lived in the city, Akiko, I said. Johnny said, no, don't. Akiko didn't sing or look at the cherry trees. She only stared out the window at the city. We went to one of the long, sandy dune beaches on the inland sea. It was a thundery day. Dark clouds, the sky all intense and lemony bright. Johnny's green Studebaker looked neon. With my tin pail and shovel, I dug holes and looked for crabs under the rocks. Akiko stayed with me for a while, and then Johnny asked her to take a walk with him into the dunes. I kept playing at the edge of the tide, and after a while I realized that except for a Japanese family packing up their picnic a ways away, I was all alone on the beach. I sort of understood I was to stay on the beach and not go into the dunes after them, but I followed them. The dunes were high and difficult to climb. I climbed the first ridge and saw nothing and slid down into the hollow between them. My legs and feet were covered with blackish sand. The sand rose up out of the hollow in all directions. Dark sand, not a blade of grass, only me. I was alone. I climbed and slid and climbed again. And I saw them below me with their clothes off. Akiko and Johnny were on a blanket, and I thought they were fighting. I'd never seen such grown-up fury. They both seemed caught in their fight, as if they had to do it. He was on top of her, and he was hurting her. I could tell that. She was under him, not struggling to get away, but her face was as pale and set as when we had been driving past the city. There was sand in her hair. I saw her hand helpless on his shoulder, protesting, clutching, exactly the short-fingered, square-nailed hand that held mine in the street market. I lost my footing on the sand and I slid backwards, out of sight, to the bottom of the dune, and I didn't dare climb up again. I sat crying because my Akiko was unhappy and because I'd liked Johnny. The next day, Johnny's skin was as red and tender as my fingers had been when I'd stolen hot rice. Mother said he had sunburn, but I knew better. It was something that had happened to him because of what I'd seen in the dunes. After their fight, in my 6-year-old wisdom, I wasn't surprised when they didn't get married, but it was for a sad reason. Johnny's sister in the States got polio and he had to go home. He was supposed to come back when his sister was better, but he wrote that she died. And then he wrote that both his mother and father were sick, and finally he didn't write at all. And Akiko put her bride magazines away. I saw that pale, set expression on Akiko's face again when she looked at Lizard Doyle, and that's when I began to make up my horror story. Lizard Doyle was a half-bird man. Nobody liked him. He had a nice wife and 2 nice daughters who went home for a visit long after Johnny went back to the States. And as soon as they were gone, Major Doyle went after Akiko. He was an important man on the base, and usually he didn't spend time on the playground, especially when his daughters weren't there. But for a week or so, he stayed at the playground for a few minutes at a time, talking to Akiko. And then Akiko wouldn't be there. I had to stay playing on the swings and in the sandbags, pretending she was there waiting for me to go home. After a while, she'd come back with that look on her face, that same quiet, set, expressionless look. And in July, as Mrs. Doyle and her 2 nice daughters were coming back to Hiroshima, the plane crashed in the Philippine Sea, and Lizard Doyle didn't even have their bellies to take home. I was 6, just discovering Nancy Drew, and I liked mystery in real life the way I liked fingernail polish. I'd only known 2 people whose family members had died, and they were both connected with Akiko. Even I knew better than to tell adults about all of that, but I decided just the way that Akiko had bought me kites and made me paper dolls, she was providing me with a real Nancy Drew mystery of my own. I was 6. I wondered how soon she'd kill again. For her 3rd victim, she chose a man named Royce Sentry, and it was a real scandal on base because he'd been involved with the making of the bomb. Even Mother couldn't understand why Akiko would get involved with a man who'd worked at Los Alamos. But she did. Roy's Sentry was a bit short, funny, cowboy-looking engineer who wore a big turquoise belt buckle and was always joking about how big his slide rule was. I took a great interest in Roy's Sentry. I wanted to know whether he had any children, how many brothers and sisters he had, where his parents lived. He had a huge family on a farm in Illinois. I sat back and waited for something bad to happen. I waited all the time that Roy's Sentry applied for marriage with Akiko under the War Brides Act. All the time Akiko happily brought out her bride magazines and looked through them and had her white Christian gown and her red Shinto kimono made every day before their marriage. I waited. Even the day of their Christian marriage, when the base commander escorted Akiko down the aisle and gave her away to Royce, I expected some last-minute horrible news. Nothing happened at all, and they went off to the States. That was 40 years ago. My family went home to the States too, where I grew up, got married out of high school, got a messy divorce I've never regretted, and raised my boy alone. I have a legal secretary business, and Eddie and I did our right. I never saw Hiroshima. I never have seen it. Not in any of those documentaries. I heard things, burn steel, human shadows. But it never sounded like the part of Japan I knew in my childhood, and I never wanted to be an expert. Hiroshima wasn't even the worst bombing in Japan. That was Yokohama, which was conventional. But because of the reaction people had to just the name of the city, I used to tell people we lived near Nagoya. And he went into the Air Force like his dad and mine, and this way he would have got married to a nice girl named Rebecca Robinson. Saturday night a week ago, he and Becky were driving down the highway, and an 18-year-old kid with a six-pack of bud and a rusty Ford pickup slammed into them and killed them both. Tuesday afternoon, Johnny Latimer called me and told me what he thought Akiko had been doing all these years. He knew about the sentries. She's a monster, Johnny said. He gave me Roy's Sentry's phone number and hers, and I called her and asked her to the funeral. Come sit down on this bench, I said to Akiko, and we both sat down by the edge of the walkway, 50 feet or so from where a man with a little yellow cemetery backhoe was waiting to fill Eddie's grave. I had my hand inside my good black leather purse. I must have looked as though I was about to reach for a handkerchief. I am so sorry, Akiko said. She still had a trace of French accent. I took a good look at her, near 60, but still beautiful. Her short, waved black hair was touched with gray, the black suit was linen, and the pearls were real, big ones with the fancy Mikimoto clasp. I wondered who paid for them. She had the look of a woman who still dresses for men, but she didn't have a wedding ring. I looked at her face and saw what I hadn't seen for 40 years, the pale, set, expressionless face of Akiko, who had stared out the window at Hiroshima. I opened my purse and let her see inside, where my hand was resting on the saw-cut grip of the pistol, and then I told her the story I had made up 40 years ago. And then I had remembered when Johnny spoke to me. I talked to Johnny Latimer last Tuesday, I said. His sister died, and then both his parents. He decided to marry a girl back home, and then she died too. He thinks you did it all. Her expression didn't change. She folded her hands in her lap. They were exactly the hands I remembered, short-fingered with clean, square nails, the hands that had held mine crossing the street, the hand she had tucked into the wide-clad sleeves of Weather's coat. I phoned Royce Sentry in Illinois. He divorced you in 1957. By that time, 4 of his brothers and sisters had died and 3 of their children. His last brother's got throat cancer. And Royce is the only other of the family left alive. After the divorce, you married one of Royce's project friends and you moved to California. Lizard Doyle saw you there. I called him too. Your new husband's family was dying off. She sat looking at the gun. Tell me it's just a story, I said. Or do it to me too. I can't live without Eddie. She was supposed to tell me I was crazy. She was supposed to tell me. She was supposed to be a monster and kill me. None of that happened. We 2 women sat on the bench, a middle-aged legal secretary from Connecticut and an elegant Japanese woman, almost in old age. Why my boy? I burst out. The way poor Johnny Latimer had yelled at me. Why'd she kill my sister? Why did it have to happen to me and mine? Eddie was an Eagle Scout, and for my birthday one year, he made me a board mounted with 14 different types of knots. After he got sick one Saturday morning in high school, he never drank more than 1 beer. He was just about to get married. He wasn't supposed to die. I wished he'd been a biker, spent every night in bars and got some girl in trouble rather than this. He was innocent. Akiko pressed her full lips together slightly, the way she had looked at the black rubble of Hiroshima. Across the field of white stones, the little yellow tractor waited to bury my boy. And finally I heard the grinding of its gears and the quiet scrape of its shovel. Did Dad do anything? Akiko looked at me and let herself blink once, as if she had never thought it might be that simple. Innocent, she said, as if death is kind and fair, like a responsible person. She didn't look at the gun again, but sat beside me with her quiet, sad face. She didn't try to convince me I was wrong or crazy from grief. She didn't ask me why I had called her after 40 years or why I'd brought a gun. She sat there in the silence with me in the white misty rows of graves and let me ask, why my boy? As if Akiko, who had held my hand across the street and provided me with a Nancy Drew mystery, could still give me clues. If she had been a monster like Johnny had thought, she would have given me an answer. But all she had was the expression on her face, which wasn't some glare like a monster that killed everyone her victims lived. I had seen the same face in my mirror after the police wakened me. My own face made me cry. Can you control it? I wanted to ask her, as if a 16-year-old Japanese schoolgirl would know how to do anything to a soldier's people thousands of miles away. And it came to me she couldn't. She had loved Johnny and Royce the way she probably loved the man who paid for those pearls. The way all that time ago she loved me. Are you afraid? I asked. I was afraid. Of being caught? She asked. And for a moment her face and her voice were tired and old women's. Over the bomb? I slipped my hand out of my purse and snapped the catch closed, holding it shut with my 2 closed fists. Tell me about Hiroshima, I said. And she told me about the countryside I remembered. She talked about Hinamatsuri dolls The gilded Shinto shrines, the taste of rice and caramels. She took the snapshot out of her purse. It was a good black leather purse like mine. All I could see was a picnic at a beach. Gestures with blurred faces. A young mother with a baby, a boy making a face, a woman serving food, a man holding up a barrel of beer, a little girl. The man was in the uniform of the Imperial Japanese Army. He'd probably been back on leave after burning Philippine villages or chasing civilians through Burma. The reasons why Akiko's father should have died were as strong as the reasons why Eddie should have lived. She talked about fishing on Hiroshima Bay with him and hearing the soba man's bicycle coming down her street in the early morning. I remembered. Thank you for coming, I told her. You've helped me. I watched her walk away across the grass toward her black car. I still don't know how she does it, any more than she does. We don't have to know. Tomorrow, I'm going to see an 18-year-old boy arraigned for drunk driving and manslaughter. His name is Terry Cogswell, a senior at Loring Air Force Base High School. He never drank much except for that one night. He's a good athlete and had a scholarship to U of Maine next year. Probably once he gets out of this, he'll still go to college, have a career, get married. He has 5 brothers and sisters. He has a girlfriend. I don't hate him. I understand him. And that's good. He reminds me of Eddie and me. He's innocent. Tomorrow at the courthouse, I'm going to touch his arm or look into his eyes, nothing more than that. And I'm going to tell him one fact. I will be the one to tell him that fact. I will be responsible for that fact. It will come from me and from Akiko, from that family in the photograph, from Eddie and Becca, from Hiroshima, from all of us, the victims and the monsters. There is no innocence. There is no safety. Some people may think so, but not you. Never any more you. You have been touched by the bomb. Remember, live.
Wow.
That wasn't perhaps quite the story you expected.
No. But it was a story, right? It was fiction.
Autobiographical.
It sounded autobiographical.
Like I said, Yayako came from Nagasaki. And she was engaged to a man who, to an American who didn't marry her. And since then, I've had a lot of years to think what it means for one country to kill 60,000 people of another country in an instant, which is why I'm a Quaker.
Powerful story.
Yeah.
What's the word for touched by the bomb?
Hibakusha.
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 Yeah, baku being bomb. He being.
But what does it mean actually?
I will tell you in a minute.
Yeah, I'll go check my.
Uh-huh. That's a rough approximation, but
Atomic bomb victim, technically.
mm-hmm.
And characters for it mean someone bomb happened, essentially, covered by the bomb.
Mm. Someone to whom the bomb happened, something. Yeah.
The he part has many meanings: incur, cover, veil, brood over, shelter.
Mhm.
But the
Shelter.
Baku is bomb, and Shah is just an ending, which means person.
Uh-huh.
Your dictionary is better than mine.
So if you don't have it and you're using Japanese often, I highly recommend getting Imiwa on your iPhone. It unfortunately does not work on Android devices. It's free, and the dictionary, that the very best English Japanese dictionary that I've ever used, which cost $700 in 1976 when I dreamt of buying it, is on this for free.
Ugh. Does it work on an iPad?
Yes,
Cool.
it's called the Imiwa, which means meaning. It used to be called Kotoba, which means word, but a few years ago they changed it. And it has several dictionaries together, including the skip method, which is the one, probably the best way to look up an unknown character by its pattern and by the number of strokes. I can look words up faster than my Japanese tutor can.
Huh.
Because
that's the one where you.
that's the $700 dictionary I couldn't afford, but coveted.
$700? Oh my
Well,
goodness.
paper, yes.
Yeah.
Holy.
Back when you had to print these things, somebody had to set the damn thing in print, both Japanese and English. So the guy who wrote it is genuinely, truly a genius. And it's called the skip method. It's probably the fastest way to look up an unknown character in Japanese.
Is that the way where you analyze, you count the number of strokes and you analyze the top and the bottom and?
Yeah, he says all characters fall into 2 or 3 patterns. One is a pattern where there's this encircling shape. One is a pattern where there's 2 radicals left and right. One's where there's top to bottom, and then the last one is just a whole thing. And you count
miscellaneous.
You count the number of, so it's in pattern 1, 2, 3, or 4. So that's your first number. Your second number is the number of strokes. And sometimes if you don't know how things are written, you'll miscount slightly on the strokes, but usually you'll get close. So if you get like 213, you look in pattern 2 at all the kanji with 13 characters. And if you don't see it, you'll look at 11, 12, 13, 14, because you probably miscounted slightly, but it narrows your search down to literally a handful of characters.
Wow.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's totally brilliant. I don't know if he's still alive, but he was in Japan when I was there. He was a friend of friends of mine. That's how I found out about the dictionary.
What is that the name of, what is the name of the actual dictionary, the paper dictionary?
Well, it was, I don't know what it was called. The method he used was skip. And somewhere, I'm blanking on his name, I know it. It should be in here. That's the dictionary. It's just by pattern. I know his name and I'm just totally blanking. I'll think of it, don't worry about it. And I think the paper dictionary still is around. You probably could buy a copy. Probably still is expensive.
Probably
but you don't need
do.
it. Here it is. The whole damn thing is for free. Imiwa is an absolutely free app on any Apple mobile device.
Yeah,
I have it on my iPad, use it all the time. I have it in my phone. I probably in the 2 hours before this, when I was doing my Japanese lesson, I probably used it 15 times. It's a great dictionary. I use it both directions. I use it when I use a word in English Tomiko-san doesn't know, so I translate it into Japanese for her, or if I'm looking up a word in the story we're reading, in Japanese, and I don't know what it means. I'll look it up and find the English. Fast and easy, really easy. But where is, okay, this must be it. Jack Halpern, that's his name.
Ah,
Halpern.
Yep. And maybe his dictionary was called the Kanji Dictionary, maybe. But it's the SKIP system, the system of kanji indexing by patterns that he invented. This guy was a total genius. And Japanese are taught a different method that does not work for us foreigners for finding unknown characters.
It works for me.
Well,
I'd say it works for me because I've used it for years and years.
that's probably why. The SKIP method is faster. I've timed it with my tutor, looking up a character neither of us knew, and I can find it faster than she can.
Okay, I have a couple of questions about words that you use that I'm not sure about. And one is, you talked about your mom getting food from the PX, but she'd be getting it from the commissary.
PX was the other word for commissary.
No, there was one side and the other side.
Really? Oh,
Commissary is food and PX is makeup and paper and everything else.
I knew not this thing.
Okay.
So now I do.
And did you say Shinto or Shinzo? I thought you said
Shinto.
Okay. And Mikimoto
Mikimoto.
for the pearls? Okay.
Yeah.
I misheard. So just the commissary then.
All right.
Only problematic word. Unless she's buying caramels.
When we were in Japan, there was a huge scandal right when we moved to Tokyo, where for some reason there was arsenic in the Morinaga caramels.
Holy moly.
Yeah. And Morinaga nearly went under because of it. That
There was really arsenic in the caramels, or was
really
it
arsenic in the caramel?
folklore?
No, this was real. It was a big
How do
scandal.
you get arsenic in your caramels? What ingredient could you possibly be adding to your caramels that would come with arsenic?
Water from Bangladesh, maybe?
Japan in those days, and especially in the 50s
Arsenic.
through the 60s, had a lot of trouble with industrial pollution in the bays around the islands. And so there were contaminated fish with all kinds of industrial contaminants. But
Here we go.
Primarily clams and shellfish.
all kinds of fish, actually, including the free swimming fish.
Yeah.
There was so much pollution that came from the factories, but I did not hear of contaminated caramels.
Yeah.
From Wikipedia, I find the Morinaga milk arsenic poisoning incident. The incident occurred when arsenic was inadvertently added to dried milk via an industrial grade of monosodium phosphate additive. The incident also led to negative health effects for thousands of others.
Did anyone die, or were people just poisoned?
And they say it was Morinaga powdered milk. It was not caramels. That
But they would have used powdered milk to make caramels.
caramels, yeah.
Caramels are basically made from cooked milk.
Mm-hmm.
The way you make the dulce de leche is a can of condensed milk that you boil till the milk caramelizes.
Dulce de leche.
And in fact, it's a treat that Russian kids make all the time.
Oh, really?
Yes, it's not confined to south of the border.
Yeah.
My kids came knowing to make that.
Without
the last time we were down in in Recife,
Our nation seemed safe at the time.
we had dulce de leche ice cream,
Mm.
which when made by real south of the border people is really, 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 really good. Yeah, so anyway, there was arsenic in the caramels.
Wow.
And so we weren't allowed to eat any Morinaga candy for a long time, which was frustrating, and I have happily eaten it many times since.
We weren't allowed to eat any
Happened to
Japanese
your
food,
Akiko.
period, when we
Yeah.
lived there. Because
Yeah.
mother said there was a shortage of food and we shouldn't be eating Japanese people's food.
Oh,
Ooh.
well, that was a good story. Now, my mother told me it was poisonous.
Well, there was that too.
Yeah.
That was the subheading.
Yes. I
So
think
what happened to your nursemaid?
she never married, and she lived in Japan and died a few years ago. So she was the last of her family. We actually had two Japanese nursemaids, and neither one of them married, probably because there were so many fewer men after the war. The other one was Nahibakusha, but they kept in touch with us until they both died.
Wow.
Yeah. We
I
get
just saw it's 2:55 here, so
it is. Anyway, thank you for listening, and
Well, thank you for reading it to
shared
us.
that
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, it's a really great story.
thank
Yeah.
you. And
Quite as brutal a horror story as at one point I thought you were going to.
Yeah.
It was a much gentler story than where I thought you were heading for a while.
Yeah, me too.
where did you think I was heading? Out of curiosity.
Horrors, I mean, potions and all kinds of nasty
Doing
things.
something dreadful.
I thought that she was somehow, taking revenge for what had been done to her family in some
Yeah.
unknown way.
Hibakusha.
It's kind of like I started out by saying, though you don't take revenge, revenge somehow hangs around.
Mm.
Of the violence we have committed on African American people, it hangs around.
Yeah.